Thank you, Mr. Méndez, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, for coming to the APT today. We've convened a meeting with a number of international experts, including you, to discuss the use of evidence that has been obtained through torture by the police, security and intelligence agencies. What would you say is the relevance of the issues we've been discussing today? What is wrong with using information obtained by torture?
Well, it's very relevant, especially in the last few years after the beginning of the so-called war on terror. Up until then, this was not much of an issue. International law clearly prohibited torture and it specifically prohibited the use of torture in any proceeding against the victim. But we didn't realize the extent to which intelligence agencies could share information. The problem is that if they do share information, they are implicitly encouraging torture.
And many people would agree that security intelligence agents sort of need to operate outside the law. Does international law really apply limits to the actions of security and intelligence actors?
Yeah, well, I come from a region of the world, Latin America, where letting security agencies act outside the law has resulted in incredible tragedies of disappearances, torture, widespread torture, prolonged arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killings, massacres in the countryside, you name it. And it's not only the tragedies themselves with the incredible cost in human lives and suffering, but also now that we have democratic governments or democratically elected governments just about everywhere except Cuba, we still have a problem with security agencies that are outside the control of the democratic system. It's very difficult to re-establish civilian control over police bodies, and because of that we also don't have an effective instrument against crime. So thinking exclusively from the perspective of Latin America, I can see that there are lessons that should be learned and that should caution on this idea that intelligence agencies necessarily have to act outside the law. When they act outside the law, they probably, they almost always generate more problems than they solve. And yes, international law does create barriers or create obstacles to acting in that manner. At the very least, international law prohibits the use of torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and it prohibits it absolutely without any emergency justifying it. But in addition, international law also obligates states to prevent torture from happening and to exercise due diligence in preventing torture. So it seems to me like with those minimum standards, we have some building blocks from which we can create standards that will be effective in preventing torture, but at the same time would not tie the hands of intelligence agencies or security agencies that need to be able to fight crime and particularly fight terrorism.
Well, over the last decade, we've been reminded of the use of torture-tainted information in the war against terrorism. What would you say to someone who asserts that it is right in cases of terrorism to use valuable intelligence to capture a known terrorist, even if that information had been obtained by torture?
Well, I think that sends the security and intelligence agencies into a very slippery slope. First, I don't believe that it's necessary to torture or to use torture-tainted evidence for purposes of fighting terrorism. But even if it is used for that purpose, it actually yields the moral high ground to the terrorists, because they can propagandize the fact that their members have been subjected to torture, and it becomes a formidable recruiting tool. So we actually perpetuate the problem of terrorism rather than fighting it effectively.
Do you think we need more precise standards recommending how state actors use information where there is a risk that it has been obtained by torture?
Yes, I think we do need more precise standards, and we need to have an open and wide-ranging debate about what those standards should be. But they should be standards that build upon the standards that we already have. Torture is wrong, and it's absolutely prohibited under all circumstances. And states have a duty to prevent it from happening. So from that point on, we should debate standards, because right now the only black letter of the law that we have on the use of torture-tainted evidence seems to refer mostly to evidence used in proceedings against the torture victim. And so it doesn't really say anything about, for example, using torture-tainted evidence to decide on immigration cases, for example, on deportation, on extradition, or even on executive action of any other sort. I don't think there would be much of a problem in gathering and collecting evidence, even obtained under torture, just for intelligence gathering purposes only. But when you're going to, when you talk about actionable intelligence, that is, when you decide operations on the basis of intelligence, it's very difficult to conceive of the ability to use evidence, for example, for targeting individuals, for arrest or for killing, on the basis of torture-tainted evidence. One, because the possibility of human error is large, but also, and more importantly, because if we let governments operate in that fashion, we're really letting them encourage torturers to continue torturing. And the whole purpose of the exclusionary rule, as it's called, is not so much to provide a fair trial or to eliminate the possibility of error. It is most importantly for the purposes of discouraging and providing a disincentive for torture.
Finally, what are some of the practical challenges involved in prohibiting the use of torture-tainted information? What solutions could you provide to overcome such challenges?
Well, the challenge is mostly that intelligence gathering operates in the dark. And it's not necessarily illegal, but it is confidential, it is secret. And states have all kinds of manners of preventing the information from coming out. And that also means that the oversight mechanisms, mostly, even in highly developed countries, tend to be also secretive. And so the public doesn't really know whether the information has been obtained under torture or not, and doesn't really know how it's been used. So I think the main challenge is not only drafting appropriate guidelines, but also creating the mechanisms by which we can really establish whether those guidelines are being used and being used effectively or not. I think that's going to be the most difficult task ahead.